Hello everyone, welcome to Ask Kochie for this Tuesday afternoon. Great to have your company. Ready, willing and able to take any questions you may have on personal finance or small business over the next 25 minutes or so. What a week it has been, just extraordinary. Last night the American share market had their biggest one-day fall since the 87 share market crash. Now, I'm old enough to have actually lived through the 87 share market crash. In fact, I was reporting BRW. I think I was working on then, Business Review Weekly magazine. I was a young reporter for the 81 gold crash, 87 share market crash, and all the ones in between. Last night on the American share market was just extraordinary. And to see that market tank in the last 30 minutes when its president came on, America's president came on and made a whole raft of announcements, none of which helped the American economy. I've started a phrase, Donald Trump, where the bloody hell are you? It is ridiculous that the leader of the free world has not launched an economic stimulus package to help the world's biggest economy. Scott Morrison, Josh Frydenberg, $17.5 billion economic stimulus package last week. Look as though they're going to announce another one later this week or early next week. A second to Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand this morning, a 25 billion New Zealand dollar economic stimulus package, because this coronavirus, the economic repercussions, means this health crisis is turning into an economic and financial crisis. And it's turning into a personal financial crisis for all of us, because we're seeing our wealth decimated on the share market. Our share market's down 30% since February 20. That's 30% in a month. That's your superannuation. That's your share market investment. We're starting to see weaker auction clearance rates in the property market because everyone's so scared of what's going on. We are headed for an economic recession, and it's great to see, I've got to say, un-Australian to acknowledge anything we do well in this country, but great to see our Reserve Bank and our government working together, and our government taking the advice of the experts in Treasury to try and come up with something that will cushion our economy, because we haven't had an economic recession in 29 years. A whole generation of Australians, any Australian under the age of 47 has not experienced an economic recession as a responsible adult. It is horrible. It is a horrible thing to go through. You don't wish it on anyone, because it becomes debilitating for average Australians. Financial pressure is just horrible. It destroys relationships. It brings so much stress on average Australians, average Australian families. You don't wish it on anyone. I don't wish it on anyone. And it's good to see our Reserve Bank and federal government working together. Unlike the United States, where their government and their central bank, the Federal Reserve, are at war with each other. And politicians are playing politics. Give it up. Be sensible. Donald Trump, you've got to do something. Having said that, and after that massive fall on Wall Street overnight, our share market up 2.5% today, after being clobbered yesterday. Why? Because there's talk. There's a whisper out of the United States that they might be about to close the American share market for a week because of this crisis. So, and the government is thinking of doing it. So the futures contract for the American market trading tonight is up 5%. That's the limit that it can be. They've put in all these limiters on trading on the American share market, both on the upside and the downside of 5%. So the futures contract in America is up a limit after having the biggest fall last night. Now, you could possibly say, oh, that's great, it's turned around. For me, it scares me even more, because the volatility is just extraordinary going on at the moment. you have no idea what the market's going to do, and that's a bad thing. They are so petrified. So it is a really challenging time, not just the health consequences of it, but also the financial ripple effect. This health crisis is becoming an economic and financial crisis which will affect us all. So happy to start taking your questions. Cess, what have we got?
There's lots of questions coming in. Robert Lindsay asks, Kochie, any ideas why the Australian government hasn't created stimulus for self-employed small businesses?
Yeah, I think, Robert, that is a really good point. Now, for self-employed businesses, if you're a business, you're going to get, and I know you're in a different, a special situation, okay, so I understand the difference, but the only thing that's benefiting you from the existing stimulus package is when you put in your next BAS, there'll be a 50% refund on your BAS up to $25,000. So that will be helpful. Or on your instalment activity statement, there'll be a 50% refund up to a total of $25,000. So if your BAS is lower, say it's your BAS is $20,000 for the quarter, then you'll get 50%, $10,000 of that back. Basically 14 days later, middle of May, you've got to pay it, and then the money comes back into your account. You also have the incentives in business incentives, depreciation incentives, accelerated depreciation, instant asset write-offs. But if you're a freelancer, for example, and that's what you mean by a solo entrepreneur, a sole practitioner, then you're quite vulnerable. And I think the government in the next package that they're talking about, the whispers I've heard, is that there will be some incentives for you there, maybe on the tax side. Interesting, Macron, the president of France last night, he locked down the country, started a stimulus package of work as well. He said no tax payments for the next 3 months. No tax payments, zero. That's a good idea. Our federal government should be looking at extraordinary measures for extraordinary times. Also, it's worth saying, one of the reasons why Donald Trump is a bit hamstrung on the stimulus is because he's got a $1 trillion budget deficit. It just shows, even though we've all complained about how our government manages the economy, this move to surplus over the last year at least has given them the firepower and the financial reserves to bring in a big stimulus package. And I think that's quite good. Thankfully, they just abandoned the surplus. Surpluses are stupid at this, in periods like this anyway. Budgets are meant to go into deficit if average Australians are under financial strain and the economy's under financial strain. So it's good they're doing it. And next one says?
Belinda Woodward said, do you think it's time to purchase shares? If not, do you have any advice?
All right, this is really interesting because is it time to purchase shares? Everyone is scared witless, or a similar word to that effect. And economic history tells us that when the herd is panicking and selling everything and it's the end of the world, that's the time to buy. Like, I've got to tell you, got to be a pretty brave person to do that. And have you picked the bottom? No one actually picks the bottom. And I was talking to my brother about this on the weekend, and he was explaining it to, sort of giving some wise advice to my nieces and nephews. And he was saying, look, if you had $10 to invest, now would probably be the time to invest 3 of them and then sit back and wait and see. No one can pick the bottom of the market, but we've had such an almighty crash down that how far more can it go? It's already come a long way. It is scary at the moment. I always say to people, there are 3 things you can do on the share market: buy, sell, or just sit on the sidelines. And often when it's too scary, sitting on the sidelines can be the best advice. You may not pick the very bottom of the market, but sort of waiting for a bit of a trend to appear, for it to settle, to bubble along the bottom, to build a base. Always getting good advice. I can't tell you whether to buy or sell at the moment because I don't know your personal circumstances. You need to get your own individual advice. But it was an interesting comment from a brother saying, if you got $10, and he is a professional advisor to high net worth individuals. But if he's telling his clients, if you got $10 to invest, invest $3 and then just wait and see what happens.
Alice Cooney says, could you explain the economic impact if we would go into total lockdown?
We go into total lockdown. So definition of lockdown is the interesting thing at the moment. We basically closed our borders to everybody. Anyone outside of Australians coming into the country. If you're an Australian coming into the country, you've got to self-isolate for 14 days if you've been overseas on a flash holiday or whatever. Or you've been floating around coming back on a cruise. All cruise ships have been stopped for the next 30 days. What this virus is showing us is that there's got to be a circuit breaker, and a lot of countries are doing it. Like Macron last night in France, Spain is doing it, Portugal is doing it, Germany is doing it. Total lockdown. So a lockdown means you can only go out of your house for essential services like visiting a doctor, buying food, or going to work. Going to work still included, even in France, even in Spain, even in Portugal. But going out to dinner to a restaurant, going to nightclubs, pubs, all shut down. Ireland even shut down its pubs overnight on St Patrick's Day. Now, for the Irish to do that, you've got to smile about these things sometimes. But for Ireland to close down its pubs and the St Patrick's Day parade on the day is pretty extreme as well. So that's the impact of a lockdown. The big impact, well, entertainment industry, restaurant industry, food industry, devastating impact. There's no doubt about that. So, but you can't sit there and say, I don't own a restaurant or a cafe or whatever, my business will be right. It won't be, because the ripple effect, the impact on consumers to do anything. Consumers, a lockdown means and remember, markets and economies are all driven on how we think, how confident we think, whether we feel confident enough to go and buy things. It's all psychological. And the danger of a lockdown, the upside, of course, is the health upside. So there's no doubting the positive health impact to control a virus and a pandemic like that. So I'm not saying that a lockdown is bad, because our health professionals are saying we've got to do it to protect our health. But from a financial point of view, it puts us in a bunker mentality. So that's why a lot of businesses will be affected, because we're not going to go out and buy things. We can't go out and buy things. Shops will be closed. Shopping centres could be closed. That's the issue. Gatherings of big people. So that's really devastating for everybody. Hopefully, and the government, all governments are thinking this, short, sharp, and then try and get back to normal as best we can. Next one says?
Kaz Amber is asking, will the government put a hold on mortgages?
That's interesting. Will the government put a hold on mortgages? Will they ask the banks to put a hold on mortgage repayments? You saw this in France overnight as well. They're putting a freeze on loan repayments, rents, that sort of thing. Again, extraordinary measures for extraordinary times. Over the last couple of days, we've had the big financial authorities loosening up the restrictions on banks and their lending criteria. The banks would not sort of say, all right, you can skip this month's mortgage. They may say, and with the government backing, you don't need to pay this month's mortgage or next month's mortgage or 3 months worth of mortgages. I don't know. All right, so I've got to fess this up, but you've asked the question, would they do it? You could, sort of an idea could be where the banks say, you don't need to pay the next 3 months mortgages, but we'll roll those repayments back into the principal, okay, of the loan. So you haven't paid it off. Doesn't mean your mortgage repayment is wiped. It just means there's a freeze on your repayment, but it's still, if you like, is added to your loan. You've got to pay it back when things start to bounce back up. And next one, Cess.
Brooke Hughes says, I'm only mid-20s, but I have 2 houses, and never having lived through a recession, can you give me an example of what's going to happen?
To house
what
prices.
I can do to keep my family afloat?
Okay. All right. A personal financial crisis. I've just finished a story on this, putting some thoughts down on, if you like, a 7-step program for a financial crisis, what to do. Because, as I said at the start, it can be really debilitating. You know, I don't know about you, but I couldn't sleep last night. I'm 2 o'clock in the morning thinking, oh, what's going to happen? I've got a small business. I help an AFL club, and we're going through, what's going to happen with a shortened season and staff and things like that. So you do worry. It becomes all-consuming. I'm no different to you, and I know a lot of people would be in this. So I actually have just written a story to try and clear my thinking, because everything looks better in the cold light of day rather than the middle of the night when you're lying awake looking at a ceiling worrying about it. If you have a plan you can stick to and a plan to follow, for me, I find that quite comforting. It gives me a process of action. I think I know I'm actually sort of doing something rather than just worrying about it in my head. So I will put a link to that on this Facebook page within the next hour. Says we can do that, can't we? So look out for that, and it will step you through what you need to do. In the past with recessions, because in terms of property, this is a bit different, because this is a recession not caused by greed or a problem in the financial system or a problem in the economy. This is what they call a black swan event. This is what all the financial markets call it. This is something that's just come out of the flaming blue and blindsided us. It's not a fundamental flaw in the economy or the financial system, and that's why it's really hard to comprehend. But it will have a ripple effect on the way we think and the way we buy property, whether we're willing to get a loan for a property, whether we're willing to change. A bunker mentality usually means we just stay where we are, so that will impact on purchasers and sellers as well. So don't think property will be completely insulated from this, because it won't. Now, having said that, if we look at sort of viruses that haven't been as bad as this in the past, like SARS and Ebola and MERS, and until they see a vaccine, will cure the whole bloody thing. And there's a solution to it if we can get a vaccine. The problem is when it will come. But when they either burn themselves out or a vaccine comes, you usually find after the economic downturn, the rebound can be quite steep too. Now, whether it will be like that because we've taken probably a bigger battering than those other pandemics. I'm not sure, but that's the good news, that we're not going into a recession because of a fundamental issue with the economy or the financial system. It's a reflection of a health crisis. Next one says.
Catherine Navarro says, will there be a credit squeeze and will investments freeze like the GFC?
Will there be? See, the GFC was a financial flaw, a financial system flaw, excess of a financial system that just couldn't be sustained. This one isn't. Will there be a credit squeeze? That really depends on how regulators react with banks. Our banks are all solid. We have one of the safest banking systems in the world. If this is a short, sharp recession, and we can get through it, and the regulators allow the banks to loosen their lending practices, because remember, over the last 2 years, to stop us getting too exuberant in bank lending, they tighten the restrictions on banks and credit policies on lending money. If they allow banks to do it, and to lend and reduce those restrictions to get us through it, it could become a bit easier, but it depends on regulators and banks. And I would suspect the Reserve Bank is going to pump more liquidity into the economy, so make liquidity of the banks a whole lot easier over the next week or so. I think the Reserve Bank is going to be doing something on Thursday that will hopefully pump more liquidity in and make lending a whole lot easier. Next one says.
Bernadette Linky says, how about giving everyone the option of accessing their super? They have hardship policies.
Bernadette, it's something that I've been talking about over the last couple of days or so, that extraordinary times mean extraordinary measures. Yes, there are hardship provisions in your superannuation that you can access your super before you actually retire. Depending how long this lasts and how deep it goes, I think that is an option that's on the cards going forward. It's an option on the cards at the moment for you anyhow. If you get into personal financial difficulty because of the economic downturn, it's quite hard. Your trustees of your super funds have to approve it. There's a process and all that sort of thing. But that is definitely a backup to be considered down the line. Next one says.
Trevor Scott says, would an incentive to spend work if it was by halving income tax rates and also personal loan, car loans, credit card rates?
Okay. The government can cut your tax rates, and that could be an option. A big tax rebate that comes through for a short period of time, like Macron is doing in France at the moment. Instead of a refund of your next BAS or IAS, to say the government says no BAS payments, no instalment activity payments for small business up to a certain revenue level. That would be a massive injection into cash flow and save jobs. There is no doubt about that. Never been done before in Australia, but countries around the world are doing it at the moment. In terms of cutting interest rates on credit cards, personal loans, things like that, that would have to be almost a government decree or an embarrassment of banks to do it, to embarrass them to do it. Now, you've got a lot of credit cards at the moment still in that 18 to 24% mark, which is absolutely outrageous when official interest rates are probably going to be cut to 0.25% at the end of the week. So, yes, there is an argument of intervention by the federal government to say, credit card issuers, banks, you cut your personal loan rates, because it's outrageous that you could be offering 2%, even though it's secured, 2 to 3% on a variable mortgage, and still be able to get away with 10 or 12% on a personal loan, which is unsecured, I know, but if you've got a good credit rating, why shouldn't you only be paying 6%? And certainly 18 to 24% on a credit card is outrageous. Next one says.
Sam asks, what impact will the stimulus package have, if any, given the existing job losses and how much panic is already setting in?
Okay, well, that's the problem with an economic stimulus. It is giving people money to stimulate the economy, like Kevin Rudd did back with the $900 with the GFC. It's a bit like the $750 that's going to welfare recipients here in Australia. There is a push in America from leading economists for the American government to give every American $1,000 straight away, instantly. So even though, I've said this before, even though Kevin Rudd's response to the GFC, everyone bagged the crap out of it, history has recorded it as being exactly the right thing to do. And you're finding other countries doing it now in this crisis. So there is a logic to it, and a good logic to it. The problem is it comes back to our thinking again. If you got $1,000 today, every Australian got $1,000, would you really go and spend it right now? Or would you not stick it under the mattress, because that's a stupid thing to do, but would you just pay off a debt with it and be really conservative? It's how you get us to confidently go out and live our life as it should, while at the same time saying you can't go to a restaurant, you can't congregate with more than maybe 100 people. Weddings are going to be cancelled if you've got more than 100 people, if a limit's been put on that. Sort of from a health point of view, you're saying, well, be really concerned. And then you're trying to say, from a financial point of view, hey, go and spend big and support the economy. You know what I mean? It's sort of, it's a hard balance to have at the moment. Next one says.
Jamie Lynn says, I'm a travelling zoo and all my jobs are cut. I'm doomed. How can I ride this out without losing it all?
Okay, a travelling zoo, yeah. Look, you're in the entertainment business. You're not alone with this. And I think the next stimulus package could be directed straight at you. It is a time to really, it is almost a bunker time, and you'll get a lot out of this personal financial crisis sort of step-by-step guide on how to cope with it that I'll post in the next hour or so. It is a time where you need to look at your costs. It is a time where you need to negotiate everything. It is a time that if you're in trouble paying any bills or repayments, talk to your supplier, talk to your credit provider and work to a payment plan. It is a time to look at alternative ways of earning cash, whether it be, and I don't know in your situation, but it's a way of just sitting down and saying, right, what else can I do? For example, Coles are trying to hiring 5,000 casuals at the moment. Is it doing a casual job just to earn income while we get through this stage until people can start sort of hiring your mobile zoo for kids' parties again? It's really hard, but you've got to think outside the square. I'm sorry I don't have a magic bullet for you, but it's really understanding where your position is and trying to think outside the square, and you're not alone, which, if that's any comfort, I'm sorry. And next one says? Michael
Zhu says, Kochie, the biggest expenditure for some retailers is not staff costs, but
rent
and no shopping centre traffic at the moment. So what's your advice on
that? I'd be going to your shopping centre owner, and Solomon Lew from Premier Investments that owns Smiggle and a whole bunch of, I've forgotten what Premier Investments, because they have so many different brands, clothing brands, which Solomon Lew runs. The only reason I know Smiggle is because I'm in there so much with my grandchildren. But that's the point he was making today, that landlords have actually got to come to the party as well. So it is the Westfields, it is the Stocklands, it's the landlords of the shopping strips at the moment. Go and talk to the landlord and say, mate, I can't pay. I've been a good business for so many years. You've got to help me get through this next couple of months before we can come out the other end. And we will come out the other end, but we got to work together on this. And the option for that landlord, stupid landlords, would say, oh, well, no, you've got to get out. Smart thinking landlords would say, hey, this is a really good tenant. I run the risk if I don't help this tenant out and get through this, if I don't help them out, I could possibly be vacant for years. And so to help a good tenant through a couple of months of hard times is worth my while. So good landlords will think like that.
Peter McGee says, what do you believe will happen to mortgage repayments when people won't be working or earning less due to coronavirus?
Okay, mortgage repayments, working less or not at all because of the virus. Look, it will be difficult. There's no doubt about that. And you need, if you're going to be in that situation, you need to talk to your bank now. You need to explain the situation. Banks generally, I know banks are pretty easy whipping boys. Banks generally don't like foreclosing on customers because it costs them money. They end up losing money on it as well. So if you've got, not only with banks, but any suppliers, any creditors, the tax office, talk to the tax office if you're going to have a tough time. Tax office, I've found, are pretty good. When my businesses have had cash flow issues, I've been on a payment plan for the tax office, and I generally find them really good. And they've put out statements over the last week or so as saying, hey, we're all in this together. As long as you talk to us, don't try and hide. And I think if you try and hide from a supplier or a financier or the tax office, they get narky. If you fess up and go and talk to them openly about your situation, more often than not, they will work through it with you. And gee, there are a lot of people in the same boat. You're not going to be the only customer going to them. Next one says.
Robert Lindsay says, do you think the banks will provide similar support to Australia as the banks have in the US?
I think the banks will be more than encouraged by the government and also the regulatory authorities to support customers through this time. There's no doubt about that. It is, if there's one message that's coming through all of this, is everyone is in it together. And we will get through it. As I said, these sorts of viruses, sharp downturn, usually a sharp rebound as well, and we will rebound. Look at China at the moment. China's almost back at work, almost back fully at work. The pandemic has shifted from that focus on China through now to Europe. The worry is the next issue is going to be Africa, which doesn't have a health system like ours and as good as ours. A bit of a worry in the United States because their health system isn't as good as ours, and the fear is a lot of Americans can't afford to get tested and also don't want to know because they can't be isolated because there's not a wages safety net, a labour safety net as good as we have here. So it is going around the world at the moment, region by region. We've got to get through. But China, through the football club, we have staff based in China, in Shanghai, and they're saying they're almost back to normal now. The factories are going, which is great for us, for them being our biggest trade partner. So while our borders are locked for people, they're certainly not locked for trade, and hopefully that gets going. I think we have time for probably one more, Cess. And look, let me know. It is extraordinary times. I don't know whether these sessions are helpful or not, but if you want me to keep doing them at this time each day, or for as many days during the week as I can, I'm very happy to. Regular viewers will know I do it once a week on a Tuesday. Ask Kochie, anything to do with personal finance and small business. But if you want me to do it more regularly during the next couple of weeks, very happy to. Just message through the Facebook site. Also, don't forget my personal finance website, Your Money and Your Life, ymyl.com.au. And I do a newsletter every Friday, which if you want to sign up for the newsletter, it's free. Every Friday are my thoughts of the biggest issues for your money during that week. And so I put that out every Friday. I do this every Tuesday, but if you want me to do it more often, I'm very happy to. So we might leave it there. Depending on what you want, I'll post a notice on social media if we're going to do it again tomorrow as well, and take more of your questions then. But don't forget to look out. I'll put a link to this personal financial crisis action plan up in the next hour or so. All right. Keep well. See you for sunrise tomorrow.